So welcome to the Wellness, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity conversation, the WIDE, as you can see the acronym, and the why, that is the question. Our colleagues who got together to have this conversation, you can see there, are a combination of people with various passions and interests around the topic of equity, inclusion, wellness, and we worked together with our academies to bring this didactic forward. By way of introduction, our names and various connections are there for you to see on the board. I will say in absentia, Dowin Boatright cannot be here this morning due to a wellness, which is, it's fair to say, his son is going to be performing at Carnegie Hall. So I said to him, in the spirit of wellness, I think that's more than fine for you to go do that. But he does send greetings, and he does wish us good luck in our conversations. As mentioned, we here on this panel represent many academies, and the intersectionality across the academies compelled us to pull together this didactic to think about, why this matters. We have a new wellness committee within SAEM. AWEM celebrates its 10th anniversary this year. ADIM has been in inception since 2012, and we realized that when you think about the topic of wellness, and kudos to SAEM for really highlighting and engaging this topic, that it couldn't be more appropriate to think about it from the lens of, excuse me, inclusion and diversity and equity. So these are our disclosures. As you see there on the slide, some of us have been engaged in various different opportunities that speak to our areas of passion. And our objectives are simple, really, to discuss and think about the national statistics of women and underrepresented in medicine, in emergency medicine, so we all have a clear appreciation for why we're having this conversation this morning. Identify the reasons why underrepresented in medicine and women struggle with advancement in academic medicine. We've had several didactics and or presentations this week that touched on some of these constructs, and we want to sort of round that out and bring this forward in our didactic this morning. A piece of that relevant to why we're here in this group is to look at microaggressions, which has not been part of the conversation, at least as what I've seen in the wellness narratives through this conference, but we are clear in understanding that the impact of microaggressions on wellness and engagement cannot be ignored. And lastly, to think about some strategies to address equity inclusion and the impact on physician wellness going forward for ourselves and for each of you in your various institutions. So the way we thought about this was to really think about what we're talking about when we consider wellness and well-being. And if you're not aware of, and should be, the National Academy of Medicine published a year ago a conceptual model for us to think about well-being and resilience as it relates to the patient's well-being, the clinical and clinician-patient relationship, how that relates to the clinician's well-being, and they really deconstructing this into both external and individual or internal constructs. This is not a model that's to be diagnostic, but more reflective of what we should be thinking about on both systems levels and individual levels, as you see here, related to this topic. Germane to this discussion and why we believe the link is clear and a part of the physician-clinician well-being is some of the factors on the socio-cultural impact or effect that is part of this narrative. And if you look up this model, you will find a host of definitions under this, but one that you should be most aware of is under the social cultural factors are topics of discrimination, topics of implicit bias, topics of explicit bias, and why that would impact clearly and obviously on one's wellness. Also, if you look at organizational factors and you look at some of the subtext for that, you also see in that domain topics of discrimination on an organizational level and how and why that would impact engagement or lack thereof the faculty, and this is also inclusive of all healthcare professionals. This model was brought together by more than 60 organizations. Emergency medicine leadership was one of them, across not just medicine in the House of EM, but also nursing and other healthcare professionals. So this is not germane to just physicians, but this is for people in healthcare. And when you think about organizational factors, how these factors in the spirit of discrimination and or disparities would impact individuals. And of course, the personal factors also plays an important role. As individuals think about their own wellness, what have they seen, what have they experienced related to microaggressions, discrimination, and bias that would impact their wellness. And so while these three areas are a piece, and I would dare say just a piece of what and how physicians' wellness and healthcare professionals' wellness are impacted, these are important constructs. Hence, our title, Wellness, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity. How are they linked, and why does it matter? So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa.
So I'm going to take us through some of the statistics, and we're going to start by looking at emergency medicine by gender. And so when we do, if we look at EM active physicians, and so that's going to be all of our physicians in the workforce, whether academic or in the community, we see that 27.6% are female. And then when we compare that to physicians as a whole across all specialties, that number is about 35%. So we are less than the national average for women across all fields of medicine, but we're close. When we look at EM residents and fellows, right, so the next wave of people that are going to be joining our ranks, we see that we have about 35.5% female that are coming out of residency, and this was in the 2017 data, I believe. And when we look at across all specialties, females make up approximately 47% of residents at that time. So we're still falling significantly below the national average for women. So then if we look at emergency medicine by race and ethnicity, I'm going to have you start, so we have three different fields of data here, 2015, 2017, and 2018. We're going to start at the bottom and work our way backwards. But if we start at 2018, this is AAMC data for academic physicians in emergency medicine, and it breaks it down by race. And if we go to the Medscape 2017, that's looking across all of emergency medicine, so not just academic, but including community. And you'll see that the numbers are pretty similar. We included the 2015 data, and there's also 2013 data that has pretty similar numbers that show that we're not making a ton of progress in our underrepresented in medicine. And so when we look at gender and race ethnicity and how those kind of mix, in our Black African American population, we see that females actually make up a majority, so they're 57% according to this Medscape study, compared to 43% male. And in a lot of other studies, there's actually a 3-to-1 female to male ratio in that group. And then females in all other groups are going to be a minority. So this is probably my favorite slide, because when we look at burnout by race and ethnicity, I'm not sure what to make of this data. It certainly doesn't seem to speak to the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, and burnout in medicine. And it begs a few questions that I think we still have left to delve into. And then when we look at burnout by gender, we do see that females have a higher incidence of burnout than males, 48% compared to 38% in men. And I think that is pretty well recognized among a lot of the surveys that have been done in a lot of the literature. And so that's what we're going to delve into these a little bit more.
So that makes us wonder, why do women and those underrepresented in medicine struggle with advancement in academic medicine? One reason is climate. Another reason that we have to consider is unconscious bias. There are several articles here that add evidence to what some of us know with unconscious bias with those underrepresented in women in medicine. Plenty of mustaches, but not enough women, shows that clearly there are more women at the assistant and instructor level, and those numbers fall drastically when you get to the chair level. An article by Madsen shows the current status of gender and racial and ethnic disparities among academic emergency medicine physicians. Those physicians were paid $50,000 less than other physicians. There's a $16,000 pay gap for newly trained physicians. And there's also a pay gap for those in public medical schools. So we wonder, what are some of these reasons? Are women negotiating less? Are men feeling that it's there in most of the higher positions that women are less qualified? There are also racial disparities in medical student membership. Boatright looked at AOA membership, and blacks and Asians were less likely to be elected to AOA than whites. And let's look at this leaky pipeline. In 46% of applicants, and then 47% of matriculants, 46% residents, what happens at the faculty level? There are only 38% of women at the faculty level. 21% are full professors, and only 16% are deans. So we need to look at these factors and make differences so we can make changes here.
Okay, so I'm just briefly going to talk about this concept of microaggressions, which many of you are likely familiar with. So we're going to go through a couple definitions and a few examples, but this certainly may be one of the contributing factors to why women and underrepresented minorities continue to lag. So a microaggression, by definition, is brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults toward people of color. And this can certainly be expanded to any marginalized group, whether we talk about gender, sexuality, or religion. So microaggressions have three types. The first type is a microassault, which is a form of microaggression involving purposeful discriminatory action, such as a verbal attack or an avoidant behavior. So an example of this would be a comment implying that a woman or person of color received their job due to affirmative action, referring to someone as colored or oriental, or displaying a swastika, whether that's on your body in the form of a tattoo, something that you're wearing, something that's displayed in your office. Microinvalidation. This is a form of microaggression that excludes or negates a person's thoughts or feelings based on his or her membership in a marginalized group. I think these are some that we see most frequently, and many of us are not aware of them a lot of the time, but it's one of those things that once you've identified what it is and what it looks like, you start to realize that it happens over and over and over throughout the course of your day. So this is that assumption that someone can't speak English based on his or her appearance. This can also come in a more subtle form, and I think we see this often played out in the media and other places, where there's this comment, well, I'm colorblind, people are people, color doesn't matter. Or in another form, well, I can't be racist, I'm not biased, my best friend is black. Right? This is a micro-invalidation. And then there is the micro-insult, which is a form or instance of microaggression that demeans a person's racial heritage or identity. So again, these can be quite subtle, but this is an employee who asks a colleague of color how she got her job, which again is the implication that maybe it came through affirmative action or some other type of quota system. When an employer tells a prospective female candidate, don't worry, we have a reasonable maternity policy. When a white employer tells a prospective candidate of color, I believe the most qualified person should get the job, regardless of race. So I'm sure that many of you in this room have been the victim of the micro-insult. Sometimes these are hard to pick up because they don't always appear derogatory at first, but if you stop and stand back and reflect, they are. So now we'd like to go into a couple of cases. So we're going to present a case, and then we'd like to have some discussion with you all around it and what your thoughts are.
So I'll start with case one. We have a female resident who meets with her PD for her 6-month evaluation as an intern. She is given feedback that she is too quiet during her resuscitations, that she needs to command the room better, and that her procedural skills are lagging behind those of her colleagues. In the next 6 months, she works to become more vocal. She finds that she has difficulty obtaining feedback from her faculty members. She finds that her attendings seem to take her intubations if she doesn't have first-pass success, when her other colleagues get multiple attempts at intubation. She returns and has her follow-up at 6 months and has found no changes in her evaluations. She then transfers to a different emergency medicine residency program. Any thoughts from the audience? It's at the bottom.
So the thought is, knowing what we have just learned about micro-assault, micro-invalidation, or micro-insult, and the impact that might have on wellness, particularly for women, and in this case, this female resident, we want to hear from you what you think, the type of insult or assault or invalidation may be in terms of the aggression, and more importantly, the outcomes and what might evolve from this. So we'll just cycle back for you to reflect on that, and we'd love to hear what your thoughts might be relative to the case.
Well, it sounds like there's an assumption that she is less capable than the other residents, and by virtue of whether it's implicit or explicit biases that some of the doctors might have, they're systematically sort of preventing her from getting an opportunity to display her abilities and to give her a fair shake. And I think these sort of microaggressions, there's a vicious cycle where you start to doubt yourself, and it doesn't sound like she was having any other supportive people to kind of negate some of those negative impacts on her. Ultimately, she decided to go for us, which might be more supportive.
Absolutely.
Can you, when you speak, just so we know who we're going to try to recruit, just kidding. Can you tell us can you tell us your name and where you're from, please?
Hi, I'm Tiffany Mitchell. I'm a third-year resident at Jacoby in the Bronx. I think the most frustrating thing about being told to speak louder, which is feedback I've both received and actually given to my junior residents, is that, you know, there's a double-edged sword to being loud. And I think the implied insult is that certain folks don't have to speak loud to be taken seriously. Certain folks can walk into the room and speak in a normal voice, and everyone stops and listens and assumes that they are in charge, whereas I know that I have to speak louder and repeat myself and say, yes, this is my patient, I'm the doctor, in order to actually be taken seriously, and have the EMS person not look at, you know, my male nurse or, you know, the med students and you know, listen to them. So I think it's a little bit frustrating, because obviously being loud comes with, you know, there's definitely some kind of negative connotation. She could have easily been given the same feedback. I thought this was going to progress and have her get, you know, feedback going forward of saying, oh, well, you know, be a little bit less aggressive, be a little bit less, you know, acerbic. So it's frustrating.
Yeah, so it absolutely is frustrating, and I think you bring up a great point. And one of the studies that we had kind of flashed up there earlier is it's a beautifully done qualitative study about internal medicine residents running codes, whether on the floor or in the MICU, and it's that one, afraid of being witchy with a B. And it really takes a deep dive into that emotional roller coaster that many women feel before they run a code, right? Because there is definitely gender normative expectations that even if you are leading, you walk a very fine line to not be seen as rude overbearing, demanding, shrill, right? We could go on and on with all the adjectives. So it's a really difficult lesson for many residents, I think in particular female residents, to kind of find their ground, to have enough confidence in themselves to be able to stand at the foot of the bed, the head of the bed, and project and take charge of the room. But there's always that thought in the back of your mind, at what cost? Right? It's that damned if I do, damned if I don't. Right? You were too quiet, Dr. Lall. Next time, speak up. So next time I speak up, you came off a little strong in there. Right? It's very hard to find that middle ground. And I think we need to recognize as educators when we're being biased about it. You know, so I think that's something that's taken time, but I think for myself, I really only tell people that they need to project if I truly can't hear them, right? But I think many women, and we talk about this too on the education side, the introverts of emergency medicine suffer from this a bit too. Finding that middle ground where they are comfortable, they are respected, but they haven't stepped over this invisible line.
And if you look at the article, Gender Differences in Emergency Physicians' Feedback to Residents, it's compounded even more. They looked at 1,300 encounters, and female residents were given discordant feedback in contrast to male residents who received consistent feedback. So as you're trying to make these changes, the attendings sometimes aren't giving you the feedback that you need. The article by Boatright also looked at this for medical students. White students were described as standout, excellent, outstanding. Blacks were described as competent. Females were described as caring, compassionate, empathetic, bright, and organized. Clearly here, there were systematic differences in how candidates were described, and this could impact their future.
The other thing I'll add on the gender differences study is that a lot of the things that were pointed out for women that feedback was given, it was related to personality, much more so than their ability to practice medicine. And I think that really speaks to, you know, we're walking this fine line, and it's all about who we are and not how well we take care of patients.
So, Brad Barth from the University of Kansas. So as somebody who wants to be an ally but also wants to provide good feedback to residents, what are some suggestions for giving feedback that, because I recognize that the nurses don't respond the same way to certain residents, and so how can I give feedback to that resident about how to better interact with that nurse or that situation without you know, being microaggressive or.
So I think, you know, opening up the conversation really honestly with the trainee and saying that you've even observed this is really powerful, right? It takes it kind of out of this microaggression and makes it more tangible to the person that it's happening to. Like that somebody else saw this, it's not just in my head, I'm not just imagining this. You know, I think some of the advice that I will give trainees routinely is maybe you really need to get into the room before the patient. You need to reintroduce yourself to your entire team. You need to make sure that everybody knows who you are, that they should be listening to your voice and what everybody's role is. And I have seen that really help some women who have struggled with commanding the room, for lack of a better term. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all answer, you know, because there are still, right, I've been out of residency 11 years. I'm sometimes the absolutely most senior person in our entire department, and I still go into rooms where the patient will talk to the nurse because he's a man. Despite the fact that I have now introduced myself like 10 times as the doctor, and my name is written on the wall, right? So I think for many of these circumstances, an ally will acknowledge that I saw that happened to you, and it shouldn't be that way. So let's work together to figure out how we can change the discussion, the dialogue around this. And here are some things you could consider trying and see if they work. And if they don't, then let's talk about it again. And I think a large part of it for me in my career has just been having the ally that's willing to put it out there like I saw it and that's not right. Like that knowledge is really empowering.
And you can go to the actual article. And the other piece I would say, again, with kudos to SAEM, to all of you who are in this room and other leaders, is that knowledge is power. The realities and the data that we're collecting related to these very topics can be affirming and reaffirming so that people aren't alone. And it's incumbent on us as leaders and educators to be well-versed in this data, to understand that there are studies and research and continued research, both qualitative and quantitative, that speaks to the realities that this happens. And we'll talk a little bit about some other areas of inquiry when we go to the next case, but as a leader, thank you for being here. And for all of you who are also here, and we've talked about it this week, it really takes knowledge and courage to be able to say, you know, we have to do better, we must do better, to be able to learn and to be able to care for our patients optimally. The link between, you know, that wellness piece, right, so being able to provide patient care and clinical care optimally can't be without thinking about these constructs. You want to give a synopsis on this?
Sure. So just kind of in summary, so I'm the immediate past president of AWEM, which is the Academy for Women in Academic Emergency Medicine here at SAEM. And that top paper there, The Impact of a Women-Focused Professional Organization on Academic Retention and Advancement. So this was actually in honor of our 10-year anniversary this year. We collected data from a lot of AWEM members, former past presidents, people who'd been in the organization since it was conceptualized, and newer members. And it was really fascinating just to see the results from this and see how important something that is targeted and intentional really can change perspective for people. And I think a lot of what I have found through AWEM is that it is that validation of the feelings of that this has happened to me too, that you are not alone, and being able to talk to people more senior than myself and have their input and perspective, and now being able to offer that to people more junior. And then the lower paper there is from our Gender Equity Research Task Force, the Making Promotion Count, the Gender Perspective. And there will be more to come from this group, but you know that there really are some barriers for women in achieving promotion, and many center around unconscious bias that if you are a woman and you have a child, that you automatically want to put your career on the back burner to take care of your family. That's not the case. And we see also that these biases are held to women who don't have children as well, simply based on their gender. So still more work to do, but I think the first step is acknowledging that this is there. And once you kind of say it, right, everyone recognizes the elephant in the room, and then you can move forward. But if nobody's willing to say that it's there, it's really hard to keep going forward.
Thanks, Michelle. And what Michelle, Dr. Lall, stated was, if you're not aware, you should be aware that the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine Equity Research Task Force was incepted to do just that, to look at all of these realities around inequities and how we can work together and collectively as an organization and academies to move the needle forward. So this next case, Dowin, Dr. Boatright was going to present. Again, please consider it under the constructs of microaggression and the impact on this patient. And I'll read it to you. A young, underrepresented in medicine physician whose research focuses on decision rules to diagnose pulmonary embolism is recruited to an academic medical center as a junior faculty. Immediately, this physician is asked to join several committees to add diversity to these groups. In most cases, the physician is the only person of color on these committees. Additionally, this physician's departmental chair requests that he make himself available to meet racial minority candidates interviewing for residency and faculty positions. After 5 years, this attending meets with the department promotions committee. There, at that meeting, he is told that his research productivity has not met institutional standards for promotion. He is advised to concentrate on obtaining more grants and publishing more papers annually. 2 years later, this attending leaves academic medicine and pursues a career in community practice. Resonate or sound familiar?
Well, I can tell you clearly this happens a lot, and I'm sure I'm not the only one in the room that knows about this.
Marquita, please introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Marquita Hicks, Wake Forest, and current ADIM president. But I know this scenario, and I'm not a primary researcher, but I think the constant, I mean, it is a struggle. You want to be there to be representative, but at the same time, you have to do what you need to do in order to get promoted also. And it's a constant battle. And it's one of those things that I try to tell particularly junior faculty, not necessarily just in EM, but junior faculty that I come across, like, don't let someone else push, make your career goals for you. You need to have a clear-cut plan as to what you're trying to do. Because it seems like in this scenario, this faculty member's plan for himself or herself was kind of pushed aside by all these other things, the extra, I call it the free work, that, we are asked to do, or kind of like, oh, well, because you're a person of color, or because you're a woman, or because you're, the only one of X, that, it would be great to have you on this, when that's not really their career agenda. So
Thank you. Any other thoughts? Please.
I will bring it to you. You don't even have to get it.
I think the other problem that goes with it, sorry, Christine Stamen, I'm in Indiana. I think the other problem that goes with this is when you have that microaggression saying, you're so-and-so, so you should get on it. Even if you've made a decision and taken the time and said, this is my path and this is my deliberate no, you're in a position where you can't do it because you are junior, because you are the only one, because you are this, and you don't want to be seen. So a lot of times that's harder, I think, than a lot of the other things, because I want to say no to these things. I don't want to do that. That's silly. Put somebody else on it. And so I think that adds to this on top of everything else.
Yep.
Hi, Nate Irvin from Hopkins. I think it speaks to this duality in role, right? And so you have this goal to sort of grow yourself and to sort of be an academic physician, but then you also recognize that you're in a position to really try to, be a role model and mentor, an example for all these other people who want to be in your shoes. And so I think it speaks to, given the limited number of us in emergency medicine, I think it speaks to this duality of purpose that you're constantly struggling with. And I don't see it ever going away, because it's always going to be there, and there's always going to be the idea, like, I'm tired of being the only one in the room. I want other people to be around me, so how do I facilitate that? And I think it's really hard.
Yeah, and I think these conversations are real, necessary, and important when you look at the attrition of URIMs along the continuum of academic medicine. We talked about this at length, where, as you see, it just attrits. This is an example of that, and attrit not only out of academia, but stagnate along the promotion pipeline from assistant to associate to full. And we can count on one hand literally how many people of color, black in particular, who are either full professors in our specialty. And it really speaks to what we can do differently to ensure that the stereotype threat, if you're not familiar with that term, by Claude Steele in his book Whistling Vivaldi, is one where underrepresented in medicine and people of color feel the burden and the ownership, and then delve into that role of, well, if black people aren't smart enough in this microaggression, or women can't do science or aren't smart enough, we start to adopt those stereotypes, which then of course leads to decreased wellness, attrition, and leaving the specialty. So any other thoughts on this case? And then we'll jump into some potential solutions.
So I have another thought, Dr. Heron. So there is some data showing that when you look at positions of leadership across, academic departments, that women, and I think we're going to find also underrepresented minorities, tend to be put into positions of leadership that surround education. And that education leadership is a little bit trickier in many promotion and tenure committees in medical schools, right? So when you look around, you might be able to say, oh, but we have women, we have underrepresented minorities that are in leadership, but if you really boil it down to what positions they hold, they don't hold the positions of power. They're not the chairs, they're not the vice chairs, they're not the PDs, they're not even the clerkship directors. They're the assistant clerkship director, the associate program director. They may have some other title of director, but they're not the medical director at the site either. And so I do think you make an excellent point about wanting to be visible and changing the standard for those that come behind us. But it's hard, right? When you really look at it, are we putting people where they're visible, but where maybe it's not really helping them to attain promotion?
And so we looked at this, right? So a few of us, particularly out of ADIM and leaders who are URIM, like Teresa Smith, who's a PD at Kings County, and the others, folks that you see there, really said, where are we and how far have we come in racial and ethnic diversity in academic emergency medicine? And what, more importantly, how can we move forward to your question and to your thoughts about that duality of feeling that you have to serve two masters, i.e. be visible and or try to be promoted. And it was an excellent review of the literature and the data. And the key recommendations, as you see there, is to start to think about measures of diversity and equity on dashboards as it relates to the return on investment for either the departments, the School of Medicine, fill in the blank, where that now becomes a point of pride and a point of reality, and affording the necessary pieces of the puzzle for promotion for URIMs. And what that means is to really foster this community of allies so that you're not the only person that is looking at this, and that your allies could include you and engage you in scholarship, in discovery, in leadership opportunities, so that you aren't isolated and you really feel as someone who belongs. And then as the work continues, to be a part of evidence-based studies to determine this impact. So as a team, we get together to raise the question, think about these next steps, and we stimulate thoughts around continuing to do research, which again will not only keep somebody engaged in academia in an area that they're already investing their time and effort, but also bring and put forth that knowledge and information out into the world of academia. So there are things that we can do and things that we can engage in, and I would also offer that in your feeling alone, particularly if you're a URIM, to find affinity groups and groups certainly in medicine for women that has been mentioned, such as FemIM and AWEM and ADIM and NMA, so that you will have a sense of support and you will be continuously refilling your tank to do the very difficult work that we must continue to do. And more importantly, Dr. Su, who's really one of the godfathers of looking at this topic of microaggression, just published this paper earlier this year on how we can disarm, racial microaggressions in particular, but, this can certainly be applied to all groups who are underrepresented or marginalized. And the first thing is to make the invisible visible, meaning that you cannot sit in isolation and you cannot afford to not call out things that are obvious. like what we heard earlier from Dr. Lall. If you see something and it is clear that it was not appropriate, whether it was a micro insult, a micro assault, a microaggression, you have to bring it to the forefront and develop the skills and the knowledge on how to do that. This helps disarm this microaggression. You name it, you call it, you educate your colleagues and those around you on what this is and get an appetite to bring this forward. It's also a good opportunity as you're doing and thinking about this work is to look at the clear link around how equity and inclusion is now the cornerstone and nugget for academic institution. The policies around LCME and accreditation are real. You can use that as a way to leverage what needs to be done. Other organizations like the AAMC Group on Diversity and Inclusion or Group on Women in Medicine are ways that you can find protocols and procedures and get support to do what you're doing in terms of strategic planning, educating the perpetuator and not sitting in silence, because sitting in silence suggests that what was said or done is condoned and or okay. And again, seek external reinforcement or support. This is particularly true in a hierarchical world in academic medicine, where as a learner, you may not feel comfortable and you may shrink back or step back and look to your senior leadership and others to help you. And us in here as leaders have to be able to ally and bring forth these realities so that what our learners are here to do is to be the best emergency physician that they can be, and they cannot do that if they are being microaggressed and therefore not well, and then therefore not going to advance our specialty. So really it's about making the invisible visible and thinking about ways we can do that in our own institution, and knowing if your institution is not quite up to speed and or aware of all of these things, this is an opportunity to serve as that subject matter expert, to become that individual who can champion and be the voice for change. Institutions and individuals, some are just simply either not aware. I will give them the benefit of the doubt. Some perhaps may not care. I will hope that is not the case. But the critical mass of those of you who are in the room and those who will be here to align and ally with you is what we need to do to change the narrative. So in summary, really the response and the charge is to just take action. We have to look at the individual perpetrator actions and determine and educate and say this is not okay. There are now policies and procedures, if not already in your institution, should be developed on, and we didn't get into this conversation, on how you are impacted as a healthcare professional by patients who are overtly biased against you or say they don't want to be cared by you or who call you nurse or don't acknowledge your authority. And those institutional program practices and structures you must be aware of and or well versed in and or be a part of creating. And then of course your social and community policies that are out there that can help drive the work, because microaggressions and wellness is not unique nor indicative of medicine alone, but I would dare say transcends to other professions such as the law professions and fill in the blank along the way. So how you align with and partner with others who are doing this work, the time is now and there's a healthy appetite for that. So what it's going to do is take a strategy. You heard Michelle and Dr. Lall, and I commend AWEM for looking at these things in a strategic way. ADIM, the same thing. We're saying, okay, we're not simply just going to talk and get together and be our support group, although that's helpful. We're going to be very deliberate, and you'll hear that word a lot, very strategic. And I will use this opportunity to motivate you all to think about in your own institutions and within SAEM and within the academy how you're going to help us. So yesterday at our equity task, there's another task force that has been formed that you will start to hear more about under Dr. Angela Mills, to look at how SAEM writ large is going to address diversity and inclusion across the specialty. And you may and may not have seen that they're now trying to collect data on the demographics of our SAEM members. And there's been a poor response rate for now, and I suspect it's because it kind of came randomly and people weren't sure what it might be about, but we're going to really try hard to collect some baseline data within our own institution called SAEM, leverage our academies to help us determine how we can do succession planning, how we can groom, how we can grow, and those sort of constructs can then also be applicable to when you go home to your own institutions, so that you're not spinning your wheels, you're not feeling lost, you're not feeling alone, you're not feeling isolated. So in conclusion, again, we talked about the wide and the why, but I would challenge you to think about the how. And the how really is going to come down to how are we going to get this done, and how will we work together to look at the link between wellness, inclusion, diversity, and equity to be able to have sustainment of our specialty that is inclusive and representative of not only the population and patients that we serve, but quite frankly, the community in which we live. So with that, I will ask our panelists if there are any more thoughts, input, and open it up for questions. It is precisely 8:48.
Thank you all so much for being here.
All right, thank you.
We appreciate your thoughts and your attendance.
Early in the morning. Thank you.